What happens if the Messi of chess is playing against the GOAT Magnus Carlsen? Well, here's the story. Magnus Carlsen has been playing a lot of online chess lately, and last Saturday he was participating in the Bullet Brawl tournament on chess.com. One of his opponents is Faustino Oro. Faustino Oro is a young guy, 10 years old, from Argentina, who is an absolute super talent, one of the greatest talents in the world of chess. At the age of 9, only half a year ago, he broke world record by scoring his first international master norm in a classical tournament. A very impressive result which had never been achieved by somebody at that age. Now Faustino Oro is playing with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. A really exciting game, and I have to say, it is a bullet game. It's only 1 minute per person, so that explains the number of mistakes by both players. But it's incredibly exciting, and we have a former world champion against very likely a future world champion playing against each other. Faustino starts here the game with 1d4 and Magnus responds with g6. Knight f3, bishop g7, e4. And now, of course, a lot of people who are fianchettoing their bishop in a lot of openings like the modern defense or the King's Indian, they would probably play d6, which is a good move. But Magnus is playing in a very provocative way, like he usually does in online games. He goes here for the move knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. And here Faustino plays the principled move e5, attacking the knight on f6. The knight goes to d5, and white goes after the knight by playing the move c4. And this looks very much like an Alekhine defense. After knight b6, white is having a very nice pawn center. And what should white do here? Well, it's a bullet game. In the bullet game, Faustino played very natural developing move knight c3. It's not the best move, but I will show you what is the best way of playing here. Is just to play the move c5, to attack the knight one more time. The knight can only really go back to d5, and now you develop your bishop to c4 to attack the knight one more time. Black has to defend it, and now you play the move knight c3, putting more pressure against the knight on d5. If you do take on c3, you take back with the pawn, and you have a very impressive pawn center, more space, easy piece play with white. So that is the way to go. I am only showing you this just in case you ever face this line yourself. You may try it to play yourself in this way. But okay, it's a bullet game. Let's see what happens. Knight c3. White continues developing, and like in the Alekhine defense, for those who don't know the Alekhine defense, it usually starts from the move 1e4 and black goes knight f6. Very provocative way of playing, also being tried by Magnus in a number of games. But after forcing the white pawns to come forward, black's strategy is to play the move d6 to undermine the pawn on e5. Well, we get to see that in a very similar way. Back to the game. After knight c3, black goes for the move d6 to challenge the pawn on e5. White captures on d6. Very logical move. Now black can, for instance, take back with the c-pawn, and this looks very similar to an Alekhine's defense. But Magnus goes for e takes d6. Symmetrical position, probably also not the best way of playing, as white could even insert here the move bishop g5. And this is very annoying because you don't want to play f6. That's really weakening your king's position. The bishop goes back, while after bishop f6, the bishop goes to h6 and you're no longer able to castle. That is simply not allowed. Anyway, Faustino goes for bishop e2, normal developing move, and both sides are getting their pieces out. Both sides are castling here. Bishop goes to g4, putting pressure on the knight, intending to remove a defender of the pawn on d4. So you don't want to allow that. After bishop takes, the pawn on c4 can be hanging. So therefore the move b3 is played. Knight c6, attacking the pawn on d4 one more time. So black is now really threatening to take that knight on f3. Bishop e3 played, and now there are different ways of playing. Magnus played a very solid move, rook e8. But I want to teach you one very standard idea for these structures. And that is to strike here with the move d5, putting more pressure against the pawn on c4. And you're not afraid of white advancing the pawn to c5. Because in that case, you play knight to c8. And then the knight will come to e7 later and to f5. And from f5, together with the bishop and the knight on c6, you're targeting the pawn on d4. And that is Okay, maybe it's not really bad for white, but I like this kind of structure for black. Anyway, let's go back. Let's see what happened in the game. Rook e8 is played, and now after h3, black decides to take on f3, bishop takes, so white is having the bishop pair and more space, looks like it's more pleasant, and there's indirect pressure against that pawn on b7. So rook b8 is played, queen to d2, now white is also connecting its rooks, and here we see a similar maneuver I've been mentioning earlier. The knight goes to e7, so now the pawn on b7 is defended, white cannot take it, and the knight is on its way to f5. Rook ad1. Bring the rook into the game, overprotecting the pawn on d4, and after knight f5, the rook goes to e1. Knight takes e3. Black is swapping all these pieces. Rook takes, queen takes, and now this may not be the most exciting position, but don't forget, it's a bullet game. The guys are playing much faster. Now, I think the knight on b6 is really badly placed. That's often the problem in the Alekhine's defense as well. So what you probably should do is get the knight back into the game via d7. It can come over to the king side, and black is probably doing okay here. But Magnus making a huge mistake here by playing the move queen e8. He loves to aim for these exchanges, but did he simply forget that after the exchange of queens on e8, the pawn on b7 is hanging? Or did he make a conscious pawn sacrifice as he played here the move c5, putting pressure against the pawn on d4, and you see that the bishop is eyeing that unprotected knight on c3. Now if you do take on c5, black will take on c3, c takes b6, a takes b6, you're still a pawn up, but because they're opposite colored bishops, there's a very good chance that black will be able to hold this. Anyway, Faustino Oro really shows very good technique here by not taking on c5, but playing the move knight b5, removing that unprotected knight, and it's fantastically placed on b5, attacking the pawn on a7, attacking the pawn on d6, and also defending the pawn on d4, while that knight on b6 is still out of play. Black played rook e7, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back to f3, and black plays the move a6. So the idea is that if this knight is going to take on d6, well, black may be able to take on d4. So white decides here to take on c5 first, attacking the knight on b6 as well. So before taking the knight, black decides here to take back on c5. Now, different options, and white is just a very nice, healthy pawn up. And what he should do probably is just activate the rook first. Black will be forced to block with the bishop, and then the knight can go back. It's an extra pawn, white is more active, and of course anything can happen in a bullet game, but objectively white should be really doing well here, and very good winning chances of course. But Faustino played here the move knight d6, and I don't like this plan too much because it does allow the move rook d7, and now you see that the knight is pinned. Okay, there are no immediate problems because the bishop is still defending the rook, but after knight e4, the rooks are coming off the board, and that really decreases the winning chances for white, in my opinion. Because although the pawn on c5 is under attack, black places the bishop on d4. It's nicely anchored there in the middle of the board. The bishop and pawn are protecting each other. And after king f1, king f8, king e2, king e7, both sides activating their king, white goes for the move f4, but the position gets more and more blocked now. So here you see that pawns being fixed on the c and f file. There is no way for either side to penetrate via the center into the opponent's position. So now a lot of maneuvering is happening. Don't forget, it's a bullet game. The players are making these moves instantly. Knight f2, black goes for the move a5, knight d3, knight c8, king f3, knight d6, knight to e1, knight e4, bishop c2, threatening to eliminate the knight on e4 and win the pawn. But the knight comes into c3, attacking the pawn on a2. White advances the pawn, and here, look at this. The knight comes to a2. And here you see, white is having an extra pawn on the b file, but this pawn can never be advanced. It's really worthless. So white has no longer any sort of advantage, but the moves are coming in faster and faster. White goes for g4, attacking the pawn on f5 with the pawn and the bishop. King f6, knight e3, knight c3, knight c1. And look now what happens. Black is absolutely okay. If he keeps on making waiting moves, there's no way to make progress. But Magnus, probably pre-moving his move here, goes for knight a2. Just blundering his knight. Knight takes a2. White is a piece up and will win the game. Bishop b2, gf5. Pawns are getting exchanged. Bishop d3. Okay, this knight on a2, it's still out of play. You should try to get it back. But Faustino comes up with a very nice and simple plan by bringing the king back to the center, so that with the king on d2, now you're controlling the c3 square. The knight is reappearing into the game. That's absolutely fine. King f6, the knight goes to d5, king e6, king c2, the bishop goes away. And okay, the position is just hopelessly lost. Magnus played bishop f6, probably forgetting about that knight takes, king takes can be played. And now white is just having an extra piece. And well, Magnus didn't want to test the skills of his young opponent to see if he's able to convert, because it's just a very easy win. You can even play b4 and try to create a passed pawn, or you can walk around with your king. That should eventually be winning for white in any case. So, very nice. This is history, guys. Faustino Oro, 10 years old, crushes the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. Let me know what you think of this game. Is this really relevant? I mean, it's a bullet game. It's fun. Magnus was probably not playing too seriously at all. But still, he doesn't like to lose. So it will hurt. And Faustino, well, he gets motivated with such a win. And who knows, we will hear more from him in the very near future. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. And I will cover many more exciting games of these stars of our game.